Thank you. We at Riverside are indeed very, very honored to be hosting the Marable Conference. And we have some skin in the game on the question of resistance and state oppression, actually. Some of you know that in the morning, I, along with Professor Cornell West and Reverend Earl Cooper Camp and Carl Dix and about 20 others will be on trial in Manhattan Criminal Court to stop and frisk. Stop and frisk has become Exhibit A in the local expression of state repression, has it not? It is very clear that one of the ways the state repression works is by infiltrating the mind of an entire population, in this case the entire population of persons of color, certainly the male persons of color, infiltrating the entire population in order to get a political result of a certain kind. I don't know how to distinguish that from terrorism. It's the same practice. And while I don't mean to suggest that I'm supposed to be a panelist here, I'll offer something else that I've been expressing and intending to live into and encourage others to live into. I said in an essay I was just writing this last week that the overreach of the state and of wealth and of power as it takes more and more and more is as natural to the nature of power as it is for my hand to put food in my mouth. It's the way the thing works. It just keeps feeding itself until it goes too far. And the too far is the expression of resistance. That's what resistance is. It's saying the system has got to stop feeding itself and bloating itself because, in fact, even those wealthy individuals, those powerful individuals at the top of the pyramid are going to suffer grievously should this whole thing collapse in its own way. Now, here's the piece I'll leave you with in this welcome. Because it is in the nature of state repression to use fear that is in your body and my body to accomplish its ends, it is your body and my body that will stop it. It can't ever really work only through intellect. It can't ever really work through writing letters to our congresspeople and so on. Those are not wrong things, goodness knows. But I do believe, and we've been shown it from at least from the time that Frederick Douglass said power, help me out here, it's right here. Isn't that great? We all know it. This is our Pledge of Allegiance, right? Right? Really? Yeah, it's a kind of power concedes nothing. Therefore, our bodies need to be on the line. Therefore, the question of a new vision of black freedom is important. I pray for the day when a conference so titled is peopled by at least as many white people as black. You know, we're a long way from the peace we need. I'm glad you're here. I wish I were able to stay. I have an essay due in the morning before I go to trial. I need to get back to it. Thank you all for being here.
Explicitly that we'd like you to come out tomorrow, Monday, April 30th, to 100 Center Street, because Reverend Stephen Phelps, Dr. Cornell West, Carol Dix, and 17 other community leaders and advocates against mass incarceration and stop and frisk will be on trial tomorrow morning. There is a rally at 8:30 a.m. and the trial begins at 9:30 a.m. So part of what we're trying to do this weekend at this conference is discuss the problems in American society and the world, but also put forward a vision for transformation. That means that we have to be on the ground defending people who are on the front lines of human transformation. Riverside Church has a long history in this struggle. I want to remind all of us, and we probably all know, that this was the place where Martin Luther King gave his famous speech against the Vietnam War that turned the ship around in the 1960s. So please, if you can join us at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow for a rally, and then at 9:30 a.m. for the trial at 100 Center Street. We're about to change the world. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is my kind of church, man, I tell you. I'm honored to be here as a moderator for a panel, for the plenary panel, Resistance and State Repression, as Reverend Phelps said. Resistance really is a precondition for any kind of freedom struggle. We understand the nature of power, we understand the nature of state repression, and what we want to do today is sort of think through what state repression looks like on the ground. We want to think through the various ways that the state operates. Obviously, we're going to talk about coercive power. We're going to talk about the ways in which the state physically conditions and disciplines, abuses, tortures, terrorizes our bodies. But we also want to talk about other forms of power, not just brute force, but also intellectually. We want to talk about media representation. We want to talk about the cultural ways that state repression happens. Repression doesn't always happen through brute force. It also happens through a different kind of coercion. It also happens through a kind of, as Ramsey talks about, a kind of consent, where everyday people actually consent to their own repression. We want to talk about what all that looks like, but we also want to talk about resistance. I mean, in some ways, this entire conference has been about the various ways that repression and oppression happen, and it's also been about the various ways that Black people, that poor people, that women, that gays, lesbians, transgender, bisexual folk have always managed to offer resistance. I think one of the challenges, though, for me as an intellectual, particularly as an activist intellectual, is that sometimes we think about resistance, particularly scholars in the last 20 years tend to think about resistance in very narrow and often symbolic ways, you know, writing a song, dressing a certain way, maybe even offering a counter-narrative through video. And I think all those things are significant, but we also want to think about what resistance looks like on the ground. What does it mean to stand for 2 or 3 or 70 committed people to stand up and get themselves arrested and then to go tomorrow and plead not guilty? What does that mean? How does that function as a site of resistance? Is that in fact a site of resistance? What does it mean for us to offer a different representation of our bodies, of our minds, of our sexuality, of our politics, of our gender performances in full public view? Is that a site of resistance? What's at stake when we offer something as a piece of resistance? What are the consequences of those forms of resistance? How do we adjudicate between competing visions of what resistance looks like? I don't have any answers for any of these questions. I'm a professor, I just ask a lot of questions. And then we get 4 really, really smart people that actually do stuff in the world to answer those questions. We have Farah, Tanis, we have Jazz Hayden, we have Laura Whitehorn, and we have Kevin Powell. And what I'd like you all to do, because I just laid a few things down and we could probably ask a million more questions, is let's start with the resistance piece, actually. And I'm going to start from the furthest from me. And I'd like you to sort of introduce yourself, talk very quickly about the work that you do, but talk about what resistance means to you, what resistance is to you.
My name is Farah, and I'm the Executive Director of Black Women's Blueprint. Black Women's Blueprint is an organization committed to fully empowering, to the full empowerment of Black women and girls, to centering, and to us that's resistance, to centering our lives, our issues, squarely within the context of racial justice, squarely within the context of human rights, and speaking about it and talking about sexual violence, talking about the intersection of sexual violence and economic justice, and talking about how state repression, how criminal justice then undermines our ability to keep ourselves safe, undermines basic human rights, like the right to bodily integrity, the right to personal security, the right to an adequate standard of living, So in speaking, in launching our voices, as I think Black women have done for centuries through the civil rights movement, even before that, through the suffrage movement, that to us is an act of resistance. Grounding our work within the context, the historical context, is an act of resistance. Demanding for truth commissions where there has been none. Demanding for accountability by government in terms of what has happened to us. Demanding that our stories be heard for us is an act of resistance. And so, you know, part of also what we do is art. We use a lot of art to do that, and we do use video. And so, since I am the first person to present, I'd like to begin by playing one of the videos that we use in order to amplify our own voices in this struggle. In November 2004, Malika Brooks, an 8-month pregnant Black woman, was shot by a police officer with a 50,000-volt taser gun outside the African American Academy in Seattle, where she was dropping off her son to school. In 2005, Sao Big Tran, a 25-year-old Vietnamese woman, was shot to death by police responding to a call for help at her San Jose home. Also in 2005, Jaisha Akins, a 5-year-old African-American girl, was handcuffed and forcibly removed from her St. Petersburg, Florida school by the police. None of the names of these women and girls, nor their experiences, nor their stories come to mind when we think of police brutality or police violence.
And I kept pumping my gas. He said, "Get your hands off the gas, and get your hands up right now." And I turned around, and as I turned around, there were 6 police officers, probably about 2 feet away from me, with their guns drawn like this, all surrounding me. And I immediately threw my hands up in the air, and I was kind of like, I didn't know what to do. One of the officers came over and grabbed my arm and threw my arm behind my back so hard that it whipped me around onto the car. And he slapped the cuffs on from that solid ring position on my palm here. And I mean, it just radiated through my arm and grabbed me off the car by my shirt and threw me face first into the ground. My glasses broke right down the middle. Cut my face open here, and they were just broken on the ground. So I'm laying on the ground, and I'm not saying anything, and they're patting me down and patting me down, and he picks me up from the ground into a standing position and slams me face first into a gas pump. And I'm in the pump like this. My arms are killing me, my wrists are killing me, the cuffs are on so tight, and I don't really know what to do. I didn't say anything. I was just like, I don't know what to do. At that point, he says, you know, "Where's your ID? Let me see your ID." And I said, my ID's in my front pocket. And he looks at my ID, and he says, "Well, I guess it's not who we're looking for." And he turns me around. He uncuffs my cuffs. He unlocks my cuffs, and turns me around. Walks me over to my car, puts me in my car, and says, "Have a good night." So I drove home, and I got home, and I didn't know what to do. I was sore. I took some aspirin, whatever I could find, and I went to the doctor the next day and found out that my collarbone had been popped out, and I didn't report to anybody because I was young and didn't really know who to tell. Didn't think anybody would believe me. I was 23. No one ever apologized. I could tell the young over. He looked over and he was, you know, he looked like he felt bad. Like you could see it in his face that he felt like something was wrong. But the man who was the main person who was dealing with me, he looked like he could care less. Like, this is my fun for the evening or something. Like it wasn't even anything he seemed fazed by it. He walked me to my car and put me in my car, and it was like that was it. Like it was I'm sorry, we had a description or whatever. It was none of that. It was very dismissive, like, oh, okay, get your car, go home.
We need the narratives of women and girls themselves, and particularly women of color who experience stops and frisks, brutal strip searches, who have been sexually assaulted, sexually harassed, beaten, shot, and killed by law enforcement agents. No one has presented the experiences of girls and young women in schools and on the streets who are harassed and intimidated by police.
I'm sure that emboldened cops, that incident. That must have emboldened them. Women have been keeping their mouths shut about this sort of thing from people in power, whether they be police or soldiers, for a long time. For most of my life, I was fighting against things. When you do civil disobedience, I've done a lot of civil disobedience and have been arrested many times, dozens of times, without having any serious injuries. I'm pretty good at going limp. I can do trainings on nonviolent resistance. But in 2003, on March 19th, the day the U.S. started dropping bombs in Iraq, we did a die-in on Fifth Avenue, Rockefeller Center, to protest what they were doing. And I had thought thousands of people would come, but it was only a couple hundred of us. And so we did. I mean, this was obviously illegal. We laid down on the ground, and we had, props of blood and things in here to act out what was happening in Baghdad that day. And the officers, they warned us, the usual routine, and then they came over. It was time to tie us up and put us in the paddy wagon, and the guy rolled me over, and he put on the cuffs, and it was so tight. Everybody else got to walk into the paddy wagon, but I didn't. They held me, 4 cops, with both my legs and my shoulders, and heaved me into the back of the paddy wagon, on top of all the other young people who they drove all around town, jostling us in the back. My hands were killing me. My arms the cuffs were on extremely tightly. They stopped at Jacob Javits Center to do initial processing instead of taking us right down Center Street. So at Javits, they opened the door, and by this time, everybody else in my paddy wagon was aware that I was losing blood. I mean, my arms were really, really too tight at the cuffs, and they started chanting, loosen her cuffs, loosen her cuffs. When it came to me, he kind of heaved me aside, ooched everybody else out of the paddy wagon. I was the last one out. When he did, he just yanked me out and threw me on the ground, then lifted me up and pushed me against the paddy wagon. A truck, a police truck that was standing there. And I went up against it and I just sort of collapsed. I wet my pants. I mean, I had no idea that I had just broken 3 ribs and cracked my sternum. And if the intent of that is to scare people from doing things, in my case it worked. I was very much afraid of handing my body over to them again. I mean, doing civil disobedience is something that I sort of automatically did throughout my life, but when they did this to me, I no longer feel like I can voluntarily hand them my body in that fashion because I'm too afraid of, I felt like I was singled out and I don't want to be singled out again. There just needs to be much more mobilizing around cases so that this doesn't, that they don't just get away with it.
We need to provoke dialogue. We need to end the invisibility of women in the debate on police brutality and in advocacy. We need to raise awareness about the urgent need for social change. We need to build a new dynamic and build communities willing to challenge the status quo. We need to bolster the current efforts to include the voices and experiences of women and strategically center this work in the human rights model because it foregrounds dignity and justice for every human being, and it makes explicit that an abuse against one member of our community undermines the rights, the safety, and the viability of our entire communities. This is about all of us. We need to unite in our advocacy so that all our voices and all our stories can count.
I really want to thank the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University, and of course the Ford Foundation for presenting this historical conference and for really giving us the opportunity and creating the space to be able to talk in this way and to be able to present our stories and to talk about resistance. I was told that we have a very short time, and so I'm going to shorten my presentation. But one of the things I want to say about this film in particular is that completing it, and actually the trailer, completing the trailer didn't occur without a great deal of backlash, as well as a refusal to support the completion of any aspect of the film and a real resistance to support the dozens of stories that we have actually collected. Folks have also been very, and especially women and women of color, and we all understand why, have been very reluctant to come forward with their stories. There are so many stories to be told. For example, that of Eleanor Bumpus, a black woman shot in 1984 by police enforcing a city-ordered eviction from her apartment in the Bronx. Kendra James, 21-year-old black woman from Oregon, shot to death by police in 2003. Katherine Johnson, an elderly black woman in Georgia, shot by undercover police officers in her own home in 2006, where she lived for 17 years. Linda Hicks, 62-year-old black woman, shot in the head in 2009. She was described by police as schizophrenic. And then there's Rekia Boyd, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, a 22-year-old black woman shot in the head by an off-duty Chicago detective on Wednesday, March 21st, 2012. Rekia Boyd's death came less than a month after the shooting death of our Trayvon Martin. None of these women's names and their experiences and their stories actually come to mind, and the several others, when we think about police brutality. There's really no doubt, and we all agree on that, there's no doubt that black men are profiled. There's no doubt that they are disproportionately targeted by police and criminal justice in the United States. We all have lived it through our brothers. We suffer through it with our sons, but law enforcement violence against black women and girls is largely invisible in our discussions, public debates, grassroots organizing, litigation strategies, legislative initiatives crafted to address police violence and misconduct have been almost exclusively informed by a paradigm centering on the young
heterosexual man as the quintessential subject, victim, or survivor of police violence. But sex matters. Gender matters. Gender makes a difference. At the community level, the destructive impact of policing on Black women is different. The way we experience law enforcement, as well as criminal justice involvement, is different. There needs to be collaboration in our demand for justice because our survival as a people depends on it. We also need to highlight the historical context. I won't go too deeply into that. However, a long history of violence exists, indeed, between all African Americans and law enforcement in this country. Colonists on this continent created slave codes, slave patrols, which were the first state-sponsored law enforcement agencies. From the enforcement of slave codes and Black codes to the enforcement of Jim Crow laws, policing in the U.S. still remains closely tied to the maintenance of racial stratification and inequality. In the case of Black women, for whom gender and race are intertwined, in addition to the brutality they faced under slave codes, they also fell victim to the gendered forms of policing of that day, which served to maintain gender stratification and inequality, even for some white women. I'm referring to policing of morality, the policing of female behavior, inappropriate female speech and dress. I'm referring to punishments for behavior that were inappropriate, infractions which were minor, specifically reserved for women, like water dunking, often to the point of drowning, public humiliation, and beatings and murder by burning at the stake. Black codes included curfews for male and female slaves and free Blacks. Some sort of system required Black men and women alike to carry passes to indicate that they were free. Black women who were found without a pass were stripped naked and beaten publicly. Many Black women were sexually assaulted by these policing forces. We're talking about the KKK, the red shirts, the night watchmen, also called the leatherheads, because of the leather helmets that they wore. Today, according to a study by the Center for Constitutional Rights on the issue of stops and frisk, 1 in 10 people stopped by the police is female. Black women, as well as Native American women, Latina, Asian, Arab women, have been and continue to be harassed, profiled, strip searched, body cavity searched, raped, beaten, and murdered by agents of the state on a systematic basis. In the statistics regarding racial profiling, no official data that we know of is currently available regarding the number of rapes and sexual assaults committed by those officers in the U.S. However, there are several studies that have been done. In Philadelphia, a report called Police Turned Predators found in 2006 that there were more than 400 examples of police using their badges to exploit women. These police officers tended to target vulnerable women such as sex workers, drug users, or those who have been drinking, knowing the victim probably won't be believed if they report. This study also states that almost 80% of women impacted by this were Black women. Women working in the sex trades in particular report rampant sexual abuse by law enforcement officers. For instance, a 2002 Chicago-based study called Sisters Speak Out, the Lives and Needs of Prostituted Women in Chicago found that 30% of exotic dancers and 24% of street-based sex workers who had been raped identified a police officer as the rapist. Approximately 20% of other acts of sexual violence were also committed by police. Please look up and research Driving While Female, which also tells the story, several stories of women being pulled over and being coerced into sex in order to get out of tickets. These incidents are rarely reported. They rarely spark marches. They rarely spark protests. This sends the message to survivors that they won't get support. Many survivors don't report their experiences because of shame, because of fear that they will not be believed, fear that they will be subject to exposure for their sexual orientation or gender identity, threats of violent retaliation by police officers, fear that they will be deported, especially if they were immigrant or undocumented immigrants, fear that they will be charged with a crime if they lodge a complaint against the police, especially if they were involved in sex work or the use of illegal drugs. In closing, I really want to just emphasize that our stories do matter. They do matter. There has been the increase in the arrests of women has skyrocketed, and especially Black women. Countrywide, Black women continue to be 4.5 times more likely than white women to be incarcerated. In closing. It's all right. Our stories as women, what happens to us in our communities, as Black women, as women of color, as immigrant women, can bolster the case for civil rights and for human rights for everyone in our communities, heavily policed and under siege by law enforcement. We must call attention to the level of abuse and violence faced by Black women in their interactions with law enforcement. We must provoke dialogue, as I've said in the film, challenge the invisibility. We need to collaborate. We need to work together as allies and discuss women in terms of police brutality. They need to be centered in the police brutality debate. They need to be centered in debates about police reform and in current advocacy efforts to raise awareness about the need for sweeping social change and for community control and community strategies so that we can police ourselves. We Black women also need access to connections and want a space next to those at the organizing tables and decision-making tables where Black women so far have found little to no space. Let us help unite and help each other in ending state violence and repression. Thank you for listening to me today.
Thank you for that. First for the powerful video, and then for the analysis, that accompanied it. It really added a layer of complexity to this. As we address that question of what is repression, I think what we're going to do just in the interest of time also is that we're going to do a lightning round. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, we kind of revisit that question, what is repression? And hopefully, maybe with slightly tighter responses, we can address that question, and then we can also take questions from the audience. So what we'll do is, we'll say, we'll start with that question again. What is I said repression? I mean, what is resistance? What is resistance? When you all think about this, what is resistance?
I was at an event at the state office building, and I was videotaping it last week, and the guy got up on the stage and he said, good afternoon, human beings. And I'm saying it again to y'all, good afternoon, human beings. I'm having problems, let me give you a little background information on myself first of all. I've had a very interesting life. I've grown up and born and raised in Harlem, and I've watched history unfold before my very eyes, right? And I've seen and been a victim of police repression from my teens, and even before that, the first time I was ever in a precinct was when I was 5 years old, because of a conflict with a teacher that wouldn't allow me to take a book home and read to my mother, after having promised me that. And they snatched the book from me, and I threw a flower pot at her. And they held me in the principal's room until closing time, and then they took me to the 32nd precinct. And that was a catalytic event in my life, And Saturday, I was arrested again in Harlem. And I was at 5 years old, and today I'm 70 years old, So nothing has changed. I've witnessed police repression, for over 65 years. And on the streets of Harlem, I was born and raised here, and I've had a very interesting life. For some of y'all that know me, I was heavily involved in streets. I got kicked out of every school I ever went to, but I ended up with 4 college degrees and even attended Harvard. But what I want to say here is I'm an organizer. When I was in Attica in 1970, I played a major role in organizing in Attica. And what took place in Attica, if anyone remembers 1970, this was the peak of the Black Power movement in this country, or the pushback. Of course, for every push, there's a pushback. It was pushback against the Black Power movement, Civil Rights movement, and communities of poor people of color. And so the jails and prisons were filled with people who had been resisting. And the concentration of them ended up in Attica. I'm not going to give you the whole Attica story, but I was a major organizer in Attica. I got sent there for 8.5 to 25 years for attempted murder of 2 policemen, which was a total frame-up, But the rage that this put me into, being falsely accused and framed and sent to prison for 25 years, made me, very bitter, angry, and dangerous, bad. And so when I got to Attica, I began to organize. And I organized and became the chief organizer in D Block Yard, which is where, but the whole prison was organizing. But that's where the events in Attica took place. I say this to preface what was the key lesson learned at Attica was that we had to put aside all of our differences and focus on the things we had in common. There were Weathermen, there were Black Panthers, there were Young Lords, there were students from a democratic society. Every kind of revolutionary organization was represented in Attica. And we agreed that we would eliminate all of these labels, every last one of them, and call ourselves the People's Party. And that created a level of cooperation and consciousness that was magnificent. Y'all saw it in the videos and movies that they have made of Attica, the cooperation and the organization of prisoners in the yard, the articulateness of those that represented the movement. In Attica, there were gay people, there were Black people, there were Latinos, there were whites, everybody. It was a representative population. But we all had one thing in common. We were all prisoners. And we were all subject to the abuse of prison life as it existed in Attica at that time. That's the lesson they sent out to the world. But we don't seem to get it. We don't get it. Because the prison population in 1970 was 300,000. It exploded to today where it's 2.4 million. America, 5% of the world's population, has the biggest prison population in humankind, human history. No other nation or empire on the face of the planet Earth has ever had a prison population, so many human beings in cages as this United States of America. They have women in there, they have children in there, they have seniors in there, they have every race and ethnicity you can think of in there. But the one thing that all of these people have in common, whether they political prisoners, women, youth, or seniors, the one thing they all have in common is that they're all prisoners and that they're all human beings. And I'm saying this because this concern of mine has been bubbling up in me for weeks about how do we address our common issues. How do we eliminate this alphabet soup of who is important and who's being impacted, and come together and see ourselves as human beings and see this as a human rights issue. We need to be looking at the things that connect us, not the things that divide us. Right? In the Georgia prison strike, we had the same thing. They organized with cell phones over 6 prisons throughout the entire state. And all the gangs and the Crips and the Bloods and the Mexicans and all the rest of them, they eliminated those labels and they came together as prisoners and they rocked that state. This is something we need to learn. We need to learn from them, man. The civil rights movement, the same thing. You know, to a degree. People put aside their differences and they all came out and they marched, you know, and they struggled. When are we going to reach that point? When are we going to start talking about the importance of our genitalia and the group, the ethnic group that we belong to, the age group that we belong to? We at war. This is a war. Anytime they put 2.4 million people, human beings, in cages, this is serious, man. This is the biggest human rights issue on the planet. And we got to get by those divisions that we've held on to for the last 40 years as prison population exploded from 300,000 to 2.4 million. And another 5 million on leashes, probation, parole, under the control of the state. This is serious, man. I mean, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. We all know that, right? That's plain, simple logic. And we keep focusing on the things that make us distinct. There's no such thing, man. The administration in those prisons speak in one voice. The 1% in this country speaks in one voice. The 99%, what are we speaking? We all over the place. All right. So I've said generally what I feel there. Everybody's issue is important. But if we're going to move forward, we have to put aside these differences, man. Nobody's minimizing the importance of anything. I mean, men are 96% of the prison population in this country. But I'm not calling this a man's movement or a man's issue. This is a human being issue, man. This is a human rights issue. Everybody. You know, and we got to get past that. You know, I don't know if I'm ruffling feathers here, you know, and I hope I am, because it's needed, right? But we have to change the nature of the narrative, and we have to change the nature of the dialogue. I was arrested again Saturday after doing Angela Davis and Liberation Summer. I was going to the hospital to see my wife, who the doctors had just said, it's over. They're talking, the hospitals talk, and they're talking about decisions that have to be made. And the police, I don't want to give you the details of it, man, but they pulled me over and for absolutely no reason, simply because I was blowing my horn. And they took me to the 32nd precinct after, my arm, right now, I'm thinking I need to go to the hospital to get x-rayed. But things got brutal, because when I come in contact with this repression, I'm not normal. I'm in a state of rage. I live in a state of rage, right? And they, we went through it, and they forcibly handcuffed me and they took me to the 32nd precinct. But after they got my fingerprints back and got my history and everything else, after 2 hours in there, they came in a group and said, "Oh, you the video man." Because those of you that know me know that I'm on the police, community relations. For the last 4 years, I'm in the street. I'm not just talking that talk, I'm walking that walk. I'm out there filming them. Every day, I walk around with a camera in my pocket. My camera is my gun. I don't attempt, I'm not just somebody that just comes and says he feels like this. I'm out there. My friends call me crazy, right? And the police, they got to the point, man, where they know me. But they retaliated against me for this, and I ended up in court the same way that Reverend Phelps and Carl Dixon, the rest of them, did their. I preceded them. Matter of fact, I filmed their event, right? But they arrested me Saturday. But after they found out who I was, they were apologizing and apologetic. But this is police. This is how they operate. First they go into cop mode and they're monsters, and then when they get you in the precinct, all of a sudden now they're trying to be nice guys. Trying to be human beings. Yeah, they found out it was going to be this was probably going to be framed as some additional retaliation. But the point I'm trying to make is that we have war. This is not going away. So if you're out here and you're just killing time and just coming to these events because what else am I going to do on a Sunday afternoon? You're wasting your time. We can't win like this. The only way we can win is if everybody gets involved, man. Bring whatever skill set you have to the table. Come in prepared to put in work and take the risks that need to be taken. Because every time I do one of these events and I look around the audience, I see the choir. I see the choir, man. Now sometimes, we get the community in, but it's only briefly. We do these action pieces. We go through the communities, man. Power to the people, so to the police, And we march through, and we have our little press conferences, and we form our videos. But the people in the community have not been mobilized. They haven't been organized so that they can take care of their own communities, man. Harlem is mine. I'm born and raised there, Harlem Hospital. I can't let these people come in my community and treat me the way they treat me. It brings tears to my eyes when I see this. And so my mission is to organize Harlem, building by building, block by block, take control of our community boards, our city council members, all our political representatives. And this is what resistance looks like to me. So that Harlem speaks in one voice. And then we need to develop a model that we can replicate all over this country. But the thing is, we are not the liberators. The people in those communities are the liberators. They are the liberators. What we need to do is figure out how we can assist them. Not coming through there with that patronizing thing, we're going to come through and we're going to shout and pout, and get ourselves arrested. No, we need to figure out how we're going to organize. The faith-based community has enormous potential. We got more churches in Harlem, man, than we got anything. And each one of those churches is led by a pastor. And each one of those pastors can organize. If he organizes his congregation to go out and start tenant association and block associations, and then we pull these into a community-wide voice, there's nothing that can happen to us in our communities that what's been happening cannot continue. Our communities will be just like the Hasidic community, the Italian community, the Irish community. You know, we'll have Zimmermans walking up and down our blocks, but they'll be us, you know. And I don't want to go on any further, but that's what resistance looks like to me. And
Hayden. Up next.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, okay, wow, Jazz. And I just want to say that Jazz and I talked, the first thing that we did together, I think, was that memorial for Troy Davis here. And we talked about what would it mean if there were an ecumenical citywide service in Riverside or in Abyssinian, where every religious community, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, you know, everything, Buddhist, would take a day to recognize, to remember Troy Davis, and then to commit their congregations to justice, to, we were talking at that point about prison justice, to an end to police terror. And I still think that's a good idea. So I just want to say a couple of things. One is, first of all, this is like really, for me, this is a great honor to be asked to be part of this conference and this panel. I was part of something called the Resistance Conspiracy Case. And it was actions against government buildings, and in fact one of them was the PBA after the murder of Eleanor Bumpers. Bombings against those buildings, carefully done, no one was hurt. And I did 14 years in prison, and that's part of what brings me here. But I just guess the one thing I want to add, Jazz, to what you were saying about Attica is, and that was one of the first things that organized me to do prison work. That's the first time I went in and visited a prisoner. Is that the other thing that Attica was the Attica brothers put their finger on an issue that was at the heart of what keeps repression going. And, you know, repression and resistance, they don't exist without each other, not only because repression is a reaction to resistance, but because the nature of the capitalist, imperialist state is that there is permanent repression. There is always repression. Why? Because otherwise, the 99 cents, you see what kind of stores I go to. The 99% would be in power. And so they need repression, and that's why some of us have been saying that the system of mass incarceration, the system of police terror, is at the heart of, and how is it at the heart? To me, because it's trying to destroy Black and other communities, oppressed communities of color, and that's where resistance comes from. So for me, as you know, I'm a white middle-class kid. I was brought up to be, I was going to be a college teacher or something. I was on my way. I had the PH, I just didn't have the D. And I had been organized by the civil rights movement to oppose racism. What changed me from someone who opposed racism and wanted it to go away and did, good things, volunteer work, to a revolutionary? And sometimes if people have heard me speak, they'll hear me say Fred Hampton, because he was the person who said to me, oh, you got to be a revolutionary, stop calling yourself a liberal. But what it was seeing the national liberation struggles around the world winning, so a strategy. So to me, there's another piece of resistance, which is understanding, we've been talking about a vision. It's not just some kind of general vision. We have a vision of what the world would be if the oppressed kicked off the colonialist powers again. And, it doesn't just happen once and then it's over, obviously. So now we're in we've been in the counter-revolution. But I think we're at a moment now, whenever repression gets worse, the state is also exposing its flanks a little bit. So it's showing its ass. And it's showing it all over the place, with the stop and frisk, with the arrest, with the police killings, with killing Marable Graham, who's the most extreme example. What happens? Why would a young Black man be afraid of the police if they're chasing him? Let me see. And then he runs, they break down the door of his house, they shoot him to death in his bathroom, in front of his family. And you know what, they said he had a little marijuana, which by the way is legal. So that exposes something. But I want to say one other thing to what Jazz said. Is, yeah, I know, we don't want to have a lot of different lists of people exactly, but we have to encompass everyone's experience. And I have to say that from the 14 years I did in prison, I saw something about genocide that I had never understood before except in the abstract. I saw that if you take women, black women, Latino women, and put them in prison during their childbearing years, what happens? They can't have kids. What happens to the kids they did have before they got locked up? They're pretty much lost. So we know about that for patents where people go back. Then you destroy the will of the community to struggle or the ability, because who's schlepping to the prisons every weekend? Whether it's to women's prisons where I was, where the visiting room is filled with women bringing the kids to visit the mothers, or whether it's a men's prison where I now go to visit Herman Bell and David Gilbert and Eddie Conway and other political prisoners. And it's also full of women in the visiting room. So you're taking women who are the backbone of resistance, along with men, but women have provided a certain thing. Let's think about, let's see, who could we name? Harriet Tubman and such a truth that, we could go on. And if you take the women out of the community and you keep them from raising the next generation, you're also doing a tremendous, you're attacking the community and you're destroying a community, which is genocide. Okay, just the last thing I want to say. So I do feel this is a moment. I mean, we've been doing prison work. I mean, I'm looking out at people with whom I've done work in support of the political prisoners who've been in for 40 years, Sundiata Kohli, Herman Bell, Sekou Odinga, Lumia, Abu Jamal. And we've been doing work around them for very many years since they were arrested. And we've been saying the prison system is about repression. Lock up masses of people, and you've got the community terrorized and unable to resist. Lock up leaders and keep them inside, and you've given the message, we will destroy your organizations, which the government has tried to do and has done, with, especially the Black movement. So we've been saying that. Why is this a moment? It's a moment, as I was saying, I think it's a moment because things have become so much more extreme. It's all, the repression is so much more out there. It's more like the iron fist is shown. Just a slight aside, I was noticing this morning in the newspaper that there's yet another story about divisions in the Zionist Israeli government, and I think that's another thing. Their absolute refusal to stop the settlements has exposed Israel as it's going on with its Zionist project, and the Palestinian struggle has exposed Israel, and so the Israeli government is now having some divisions, and there's more of a movement within Israel in favor of the Palestinians. So those things happened at that moment. Right before I came in here, I was fortunate to walk up to Johanna when she was on the phone with Mumia, and she handed me the phone, and I had a short conversation with Mumia Abu Jamal, and the way he said it, I was talking about movement building and how we were going to try to address that. He said, Laura, in our day, we were a lot of rivers, but we never realized that we had to be the ocean. We had to take, and so when we're talking about divisions, I want to talk about the divisions in the movement and how we have to, if I see an organization that I think I have a little difference with, and they're doing anti-police brutality work, I'm going to jump in there and join. And I think those are the divisions we now have to sort of put behind us and join together, because the last thing I'll say for now is I've been reading a lot of, I'm rereading W.B. Du Bois on John Brown and a lot of stuff on John Brown, and I've been thinking, okay, what's become clear to me again is that when people lived in the time when slavery was legal, it wasn't, I used to think, how could people live? Why weren't they all fighting it? I'm talking about white people now, who I see, Northerners. And what I realize now is that that's what we're doing now with mass incarceration. We're living with a form of repression and destruction of Black communities and other communities of color that is the exact equivalent in terms of its effect of slavery. But I think, what's the one thing, if I were going to be John Brown, I was part of the John Brown Anti-Klan Committee for years, what would where we want Reserve to be. And I'm not sure. You know, the Department of Justice for the federal system, how about DOCS in Albany, how about CDCHR in Sacramento? So we have to build a movement that has more unity than we've had, or we will not be able to attack all those little points where the repression is. All right, I'll stop there for now.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm grateful to God for this opportunity. There's a lot I want to say, but I've been moved by the things shared by the brilliant panelists. I really appreciate all of you. As you all were speaking, I just was sitting here thinking about this word, Dr. Hill, resistance, and realizing that I'm now in my 40s, and that I actually started doing this work as a youth activist, as a teenager. When I think about resistance in my own journey, it started with something called the anti-apartheid movement. I was a student at Rutgers University. Y'all who know Columbia University's history know that students here were doing the same thing. We were taking over buildings all over the country, resisting our universities, our institutions, supporting corporations that were investing in racist apartheid South Africa. When I think about resistance, the name Eleanor Bumpurs was mentioned earlier. Myself and Lisa Williamson, we all know a sister soldier. Many of us who were activists back in the day were organizing around rape and police brutality cases here in New York City. Gosh, we talk Michael Griffin, Howard Beach, to what happened to Yusef Hawkins and Bensonhurst. We were there. We were often marginalized as younger activists, but we were certainly doing the work because we understood part of resistance is using your voice and being right there in the front lines. When I think about resistance, y'all who are New Yorkers, remember there was something called welfare hotels in New York City, where you saw many working class people being put into these despicable situations, and we actually were organizing in those hotels because we believe that resistance is going where the people are. Something that Brother Hayden said that I talked about is that I actually don't agree that we're speaking to the choir because I don't know 90% of the people in the audience here. Many of these faces are new to me. And I think it's important for us when we think about resistance to understand that even if you're just reaching one person, every time you open your mouth, that's a form of resistance because hopefully you are multiplying your ideas and amplifying it to someone who will go out there and do the work. And I feel that way in the 28 years that I've been doing this work, that it's always going to be a small group of people. When I was much younger, I used to think that was going to be some mass revolution that's going to happen instantly. It doesn't work like that. I look around now. April Silver is one of the few people from the 80s that I still work with to this day consistently because she and I and a few other folks who came up in the 80s are some of the few folks who just didn't drop out of the movement or the struggle, if you will. And so when I think about resistance, there's also understanding that this is a very lonely road. You're going to be penalized, you're going to be fired from jobs, you're going to be denied job opportunities and fellowships and grants. You're going to have difficulty with your housing situation. I think all of us up here can attest to those kind of things. You're going to struggle financially at times. You're going to have people call you crazy. You're going to have people in your own family disrespect you. But it's like that saying from the Civil Rights era, it's a river of no return. Once you become conscious of injustice on this planet, you have no choice but to resist, as Sonia Sanchez always says. I also want to add a couple of things. I think it's important to say, as I've gotten older, and hopefully a little bit smarter, I do see every single one of you in this audience as my sister and brother. I do believe in coalition building. I believe in the human family. I also understand that I'm an African. I'm never going to apologize for being who I am and being very clear. There's certain specific struggles that I have to deal with in the African or Black community, but it's not an either-or conversation for me. So I want us to think about leaving either-or conversations in the 20th century where they belong, and let's come into the 21st century where we understand there's some issues that we're going to have to deal with germane to a community of color, or to white sisters and brothers, or to the LGBT community, or to other communities, but we also have to have the courage to say, let's work together. For example, one of the things that was interesting to me, and I agree because I think it's obscene, because I think a lot of this is upstate prisons as well, it's obscene the level of mass incarceration in this country. I live in Brooklyn, New York, which has the biggest Black community in America. 1 million African people live in Brooklyn, New York. I can't tell you how many young Black males call me every single day, the folks that I work with looking for jobs because they all have criminal records. Y'all know what I'm talking about. But I also am clear because I believe that we have to think about all forms of oppression equally. If we really are activists and really about resisting, that even if the mass incarceration incarceration ended tomorrow, there still would be something called gender violence on this planet, sisters and brothers. You know, we're talking about human rights issues here. I agree that mass incarceration is a human rights issue, but also the fact that our sister Eden is talking about the fact that 1 billion people on the planet at some point in their lives will be the victim of some form of violence. That's an equal human rights issue. So we got to be also very careful, or we have to resist the temptation because of our own specific experiences of thinking that somehow our particular struggle is more important than the other struggle. We should be opposed to all forms of oppression equally at all times. That's how we become serious, I feel, progressive resistors, and really about the human family. Are y'all with me out there? That's what I'm talking about. I think that we also have to understand, when I think about the term resistance, you know, one thing I didn't think about 28 years ago was that it's not just about the external work that we do, but it also has to be us resisting things that happen inside of us. There's not a single person out there who's not been victimized in some way by patriarchy, by racism, by capitalism, and has internalized it. Every single one of us. If you say you have not, you are lying to yourself. For example, many of us in the progressive community can't even get along with each other. And so I think that something that Angela Davis said last night, and I know some of y'all were there last night, but she has said it, Gandhi has said it, many folks have said it, we have to exercise love on a consistent basis. I don't think you can talk about resistance if you don't put the word love out there, because what we're resisting is all the hatred out there in the world. And so I think that for me, when I think about resistance now, because I look at the world holistically, and I don't believe in imposing who I am on people, but you're looking at someone who's a vegan, I don't believe in hurting animals at this point in my life. And y'all want to eat meat, that's your business, but I don't. But what I'm getting at is that I see the struggle, the resistance struggle on 3 levels now. It's what we got to deal with within ourselves, while simultaneously dealing with all the insanities that have been put upon our communities, because we know we have to fight folks in our communities who are resisting us, trying to do the work. And then obviously the biggest piece of it is the systems of oppression, racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, heterosexism, etc. So I think we need to really be clear that it's coming from different angles. And one of the challenges that I put out to the progressives of all backgrounds is that if you are not constantly evolving your thinking and your behavior and your actions, we will have conversations and ask the question, well, who's actually organizing the people? Well, I think the answers are in our history. You referenced Fred Hampton, the Black Panther Party. It was a very simple thing. The Panther Party didn't just go into the community and say, here, let's read Mao, let's study all these revolutionary doctrines. They said, what do y'all need to eat? We call it a breakfast program. What about some basic health care for y'all? Let's have free health care screenings. And so anyone in 2012 who's not actually providing help to the community in terms of housing, in terms of education, in terms of jobs, job training, etc. To me, you're a hypocritical progressive. You're not really an activist and revolutionary at all. Anyone can get up and protest. Anyone can read a book, write a blog. But what I believe is necessary, which is what some of us try to do, is let's provide services to people. Once you do that, then the people are more likely to come to your community program. You're not going to see the same people over and over again. And I also think it's important that we start to think about the language that we use. Everyone up here, we can easily spit out, you know, Marxist-Leninism. We can talk about Mao. We can talk about Castro. We've read all of these books. We're voracious readers. But when I'm around my homies in Brooklyn, I keep it real, son, and ask them on a simple level, what's going on in your life, son? You know what I mean? You can't get out there and start talking all this. So I think one of the things we need to resist is this need as progressives to, 1, talk too much, 2, refuse to understand the importance of simplifying what you're saying to the folks. I think many of us don't even realize, it was said actually in my church today, that even those of us who call ourselves progressives can actually become elitists. Very elitist. And so I'm saying these things because I'm tired in my 40s. You know, everything from anti-apartheid movement to being out there at Zuccotti Park with the Occupy Wall Street movement. I mean, Troy Davis, one of the many folks organizing around that, now deeply involved in this whole Trayvon Martin situation, and definitely involved in racial profiling. But what's important to me is that I'm glad that there are people committed to this work for the rest of their lives, but I also want to just challenge us to really think about what resistance means as we're doing the work amongst the people we're claiming to represent, and do they really even understand what we're talking about in 2012? You know, I know a lot of us progressives cannot stand the right wing, but one of the things I actually appreciate about them, they keep it very simple in a language that regular folks on their side of the conversation can understand, whereas we are oftentimes going over people's heads. The last thing I'll say, because I think this is important, is that, this is to my white sisters and brothers, and again, I do see everyone as our sisters and brothers. You referenced John Brown. I don't care about white folks doing quote-unquote revolutionary stuff and taking over stuff. What I care about now in 2012 more than ever, because I understand that the system has permeated the minds of all of us with this thing called white supremacy, all of us. What I care about is how many white sisters and brothers actually have the courage now, 2012 and beyond, to go into white communities and actually do anti-racism work. That's what I care about. You know, because I'm one of those people, I blog every single week, and I can't tell you, every single week I'm getting called a nigger, a coon, a jigaboo, a spade, all kinds of names. Not by Tea Party members, not by Republican Party members, but by regular white folks who simply can understand why I'm talking about Trayvon Martin and other issues. And it's just like this, it's no different than what I say to men. If you all of a sudden as a man feel that it's important for you to deal with issues of patriarchy and sexism, it's not enough just to hang out around women. You have to do the real work with other men. You know, that's what has to happen. If you believe that homophobia is wrong, you just don't hang around the LGBT community as a so-called straight person. You have to do anti-homophobic work with straight people. Are y'all out there with me? And so, one of the resistances that I want us to see is to have the courage to actually go into the communities that need to have those conversations, as opposed to being around the folks who already have it on a regular basis. Thank y'all.
Can you give these 4 panelists another round of applause? This has really been incredible. I want to create space for audience questions. I know we're a little tight on time, but I want to create space for audience questions. I just wanted to, again, just reiterate how important it was for you all to talk about these issues. I'm still struck by Farah's video, and I think it really emphasized the need to, one, put a spotlight on folk who have been often rendered either invisible or disposable within the public imagination, and also to offer a counter-narrative, offer a different story of who's catching hell. Oftentimes our perception of violence, our perception of state-sponsored terrorism, state oppression, becomes gendered in such a way that we only see male bodies as catching hell, when in fact female bodies are catching hell, not just in the same ways, but also in very specific ways that often get lost because of the blind spots we create through patriarchy. And I think part of how we have to make sense of that is through what Laura talks about, right? Which is first having a principled, deep, critical analysis of how power functions and how power operates. To understand that state power is inexorable, it's racist, its very nature is to do what it does. And so we're waiting for state power to get tired. You know, as old folks say, slave masters don't retire, right? You know, we have to imagine a different way of action, and I think part of what that looks like, as both Laura and Jazz talked about, is to organize, right? It's not enough to just have the critical analysis, it's not enough to just tell a different story, it's also about organizing, coming together and understanding, cutting across difference, having a kind of strategic essentialism which says that yes, we understand that there are different experiences and different stories and different narratives, but in particular moments we must be connected. Like both at the arm and at the circumstance, so that we can engage in a kind of praxis that moves us forward. At the same time, though, there also has to be a kind of strategic individualism that acknowledges that even within our collective movements, there are identity politics that matter, right? That it's not enough for us to just say we are the people united, although we have to be the people who are united. We must understand the way in which race, genders, sexual identity, class, and so forth, nation, state status, geography, all these things matter. And I think the way that we organize gets us right back to where Kevin leaves us, right? Which is that, yes, we must be organized in certain ways and within particular spaces. It's not enough to just organize like that with the choir. We need to go to the tough spaces. We need to go to the difficult spaces, and we have to be willing to have difficult conversations within those spaces. You know, talking about anti-homophobic work is easy. You know, when I'm at LGBT conference, it's hard to do that in your barbershop. You know, and that's all. I mean, if I'm hearing you right, and that's a kind of resistance as well. I mean, that's an important kind of resistance. You know what I mean? And I think what the 4 panelists have also modeled lastly is, I think, the various ways that resistance plays out. Sometimes it does play out in organized movements. Sometimes it does play out through particular actions, particular tactics and strategies, particularly in a revolutionary movement. There's certain things you got to do. But it also plays out in representation. That video was a powerful act of resistance. But we never want to romanticize resistance and think that we can just do it through videos. Right? The video is necessary, just like calling out the names of the sisters who've been ignored is necessary, but then organizing and joining in a resistance movement is also necessary, but then doing it in our everyday life, so there is such a huge gap between our professed politics and our lived experience, right? Because that's also a problem. You can be a patriarch you know, in your house and be a feminist on the street, and that also produces its own kind of contradictions that don't just undermine our own humanity, but also undermine the movements that we're trying to be a part of. So it's resistance looks a whole lot of ways, it operates in a whole lot of spaces, and our goal here wasn't to offer a concrete Webster's definition of resistance as much as it was for us to imagine and reimagine ourselves and our community and our struggle in ways that make our resistance thicker, more healing, more helpful, and ultimately more successful. And I think they did that. I think they do, man. So let's, please.
I just wanted to add one thing, which is that since we've been talking about mass incarceration as a part of this, it's also who is the movement. And, you know, this is the end of a conference that is, you know, sort of an academic conference, but the most activist academic conference I've ever been to. So, I mean, this may not be necessary to say, but, you know, there is someone, I can't remember who it is, up on here, who wrote a book with Mumia Abu-Jamal about the cell and the prison cell and the classroom. But if you're in a classroom, you got to get the prison cell into the classroom in the voice of the person in the prison cell too. So I think it's a challenge, I think, to all of us that if you're not someone who already has a relationship to prisoners and brings their voices to spaces like this and to the movement against mass incarceration, we got to do that because that's part of the movement. Part of what was so powerful about Attica was the voices of the men in Attica. So I just wanted to add that, you know, and one other part of that is the political prisoners who've been in for 40 years. When they first went in, and for many years, and I know I'm going to see some nods from some people when I say this, people don't want to hear about that. Even people in the left, the black left, the white left, you know, a lot of people don't want to hear about them. And so we have to ask those hard questions too about standing up for the people who, and you don't have to agree with them. You know, okay, so let's just say for a second, you think that someone was guilty of killing cops, and that was part of a strategy in those days. You don't have to like that strategy to support that prisoner. And you don't have to like the full politics of someone who's under a direct attack of the state, but we have to defend our own, you know, comrades. So that was just the last thing I wanted to say, that the prisoners' voices have to be heard as part of this.
We've been given a slight increase in time, so for which I'm extremely grateful. And so we're going to, I think we have 25 minutes. We were supposed to have like 15 left, but we just decided to occupy. So we're going to start with the brother right there. And then okay, hands are starting to pop up, so we might need a line or something. Maybe, I don't know. Do we have a handheld mic? Can I give this one up? Can I? Yeah, right. Not at these parts, right? Yeah, I'll go up there, okay. And I'll go to the podium then. Okay, just yeah. Now, I know this has probably never happened before at a community-based panel discussion, but occasionally I've seen people come up with more comments than questions. So, just I'm sure this is not necessary, but please keep these to suitably brief questions.
Thanks for speaking.
Brief comments are okay too, okay? Is that what I heard? But brief comments, really.
That's the briefest comment, thank you. And the question I had is like, been thinking about the prison industrial complex and the explosion from 300,000 prisoners to 2.4 million prisoners, and especially as far as an idea of like the right kind of like, you know, get a little bit of pushback from what was accomplished in the 60s. Morality and vice seems to be the main ideological mode of attack. If this is a war, and wars are about hearts and minds, there are significant numbers of people who are inside of middle white America, and also significant amounts of people inside of repressed, targeted America, whether that's poor black folks, poor white folks, poor women, poor gays, what have you. Poor people are going to prison more than those who are not poor, period. So in the realm of like morality as being a battleground, ideology being a battleground, at what point and how do we start talking about the legalization of drugs and the decriminalization of vice? Because it appears that that is the primary major problem I have talking to people that are of the same complexion as me and of the same class as me, is that people actually believe that it is a wrong to smoke crack, that it's wrong to have sex for money, and that having sex for money and smoking crack, that you're supposed to be in jail for that. And to deconstruct that seems to be much as difficult as going at the state with a direct action plan of resistance. How do we deconstruct that in our communities and in our day-to-day lives?
I think what we're going to do is have a few questions come on the table and then have the panelists respond. We're going to have a few more comments so that we have a richer discussion as we go forward. Thank you.
Okay, hello, thank you all. I guess my question actually can kind of piggyback off of what the brother mentioned. I'm concerned with how we resist the policing of our community. I'm a Harlemite too, die hard. And teaching our children how to interact with what is happening with the police. So, I mean, it's like they either fear them or they hate them, and it's understandable why. And, you know, I don't want to be the person that teaches my child you have to, you know, lay on the floor if a police comes at you, you know, put your hands down. You know, but I've been taught these things, you know, not to raise my hands above here, when I talk, not to do my natural, you know, expressive self. I don't want to, you know, do that to my own children, and yet I want them to be safe, too.
My name is Matthew Bede. I'm a former faculty member of the City University of New York, a founder of Medgar College. In 1976, free tuition vanished from the City University. Education is the most important residual in any society's development. Our neighbor to the south, Brazil, has free education from elementary school to university. We do not. As a matter of fact, Cooper Union just the other day was saying the graduate school tuition would be installed. So that leaves just Cooper Union with free tuition. My point is that in our struggle, we should now insist that a return to free tuition in the City University of New York. It's been too long that we talk about how important education. We have an education president, and he should have this as one of his real agendas to return free education, not just to the military academies, but to all of these city and state universities as it is in our Brazil neighbor to the south. Thank you.
What can we? Make sure you use the mic, brother, just so we can hear you.
So many good issues raised here. Speaking to one of the last questions, police and know your rights. This is my position on that. Knowing your rights teaches submission. We have no rights. Dred Scott is alive and well. You know, I'm educated, I'm a senior, I'm experienced, and no police didn't care nothing about my rights. You know, so we have to come up with something else besides know your rights. Know your rights teaches submission. I know everyone is worried about their children and how they're going to interact with the police, but that paradigm does not work. It does not work, man. We had 700,000 stop and frisk last year. 87% of them were African Americans and Latinos. All right? And they run us through that system, and they do not care about our rights. The district attorney's office doesn't care about them, the police don't care about them, and our politicians don't even think it's an issue worthy of even addressing, right? So we have no rights. But I wanted to talk about also...
Can I just push back a little bit though? Is there any value in knowing what even if they're dishonoring and disrespecting the system, is there any value in knowing what the rights are as we try to, construct a path of resistance, right? I mean, that's part of what the Panthers understood was their rights in relation to the police, right?
Yeah, I'm saying, Dred Scott decision was written in 1857, and they said that black men have no rights, which the state is obligated, which white people are obligated to respect. That's a reality. That is a reality. There's no way, man, that you can lock up 1 million African Americans in this country here and stop and frisk 80% of 700,000. We have no rights. Nothing tells it. I mean, those numbers make that plain. So what should we be teaching our kids? We should be organizing them to take back their communities so that this doesn't happen. So that they treat us the same way in our communities, in the Harlems of America, just like they treat the Hasidic Jews in their community. That's what we have to do. We have to take back our communities, man. You understand? Because they are not going to respect us. We have been, I don't know whether you're familiar with this concept of learned helplessness. You put an animal in a cage, and then you poke it, and at first it growls, and it tries to get at you, it's very aggressive. But after a while, it sees that its growling has no effect, and it just lays down and accepts the torture. It accepts it. That's what's happened to our communities. Our communities are divided, they're fractured, and they accept this as the status quo as being the only reality. Oh, they walk by and they see 10 kids lined up against the wall with the police, NYPD around, a bunch of white guys, man, with their hats on backwards and badges hanging off their chest, and woke up in the morning, couldn't even get breakfast from their wives, man. And they're in our communities, treating our kids like this here. And you know what the community members do? They walk right on by. Like this is the most normal thing in the world. That's learned helplessness. And if we teach our kids, you gotta be polite, it's the same thing they taught us in slavery, in the Reconstruction period, keep your head down, don't make eye contact, step off the curb. No. This is our community, man. Nobody comes in here and tells us what to do in here, right? That's what the Hasidic Jews do. You don't see this in their communities. You don't see it in the Irish community, Italian community, none of these communities. And so we're going to have to change the paradigm because that hasn't worked. In 40 years, the prison population just blew off the charts. I mean, we outdistance everyone in the world while we're teaching our kids to be passive and go along with this because we're afraid that something's going to happen to them. Yeah, something's going to happen to them. And it's continuing to happen to them. They're going to jail. They're going to prison.
I'm going to pause right there just because we want to make sure we get some other panelists on this question, and then we're going to come back to you. I have to make sure everybody gets a chance to respond. I ain't got a mic yet. I gave my mic up. So we just pass everything down. I just want to give everybody a chance to respond to this, and we can keep flowing because we got five or six more people. We got about 15 minutes.
I think the issue of teaching rights.
Yeah, you good now?
Of teaching rights is extremely critical. And in terms of teaching our children rights, it's not just about knowing your rights, how to lay down and how to handle the police and be quiet and don't say anything. But again, this goes back to the issue of human rights, the issue of your humanity, and that you should be valued as a human being. And what does that mean if you have to teach that to a community where we've been so dehumanized for so long? There needs to be a re-education. And so we understand and we value the teaching of rights. The other thing is, there's a need to organize, but there's a need to organize in a way that we haven't done since the 1940s, I think. I think this is around when Martin Luther King and the NAACP petitioned the international community and shamed the United States by letting everyone know what was going on right inside. Nowadays, the United States is constantly talking about repression and abuse that is happening in other countries, like Haiti, like Afghanistan, and all these other countries, no one's talking about mass incarceration. No one's talking about the dehumanization, torture. No one's talking about the level of violence that is occurring to people living right here in this country. It's like there's no, the information is not being given out there. There are mechanisms through the UN, and I know people say, oh, human rights, or that's a white thing, or that's something that the UN started, but I think human rights are indigenous. I think human rights are ancestral. I think human rights is something that we learn and that we know in terms of just treating and recognizing and seeing spirit and seeing and acknowledging each other. And so I think that we need to use those mechanisms. We need to petition the international community. We need to do the shadow reports when they come up. The United States has to give shadow reports, make shadow reports to the international community on conventions and treaties that it ratifies. There's a race treaty, there's a treaty against torture, there are other treaties. There's a treaty that deals specifically with how police are supposed to treat citizens, and they make these reports. We don't know about it because they're not going to tell us, because then we may present ourselves and give testimonies that completely counter it. And so we need to shame the United States. We can't do this work alone. Let's reach out to the international community. And that's
powerful. Some would argue the United States has no shame, right? So, you can't read. No, I feel you, but I'm just saying. Yeah, go ahead.
You know, when I was 14, 15 years old, I got badly brutalized by a police officer in my hometown of Jersey City. He bloodied my nose. While my hands were handcuffed behind my back in the backseat of the car. The crime, quote unquote, me and another young brother, Puerto Rican brother, simply were fighting after school. I got handcuffed to a holding cell, and my mom showed up. I'm raised by a single mother, and you can imagine her reaction. I will say that I did not deserve that. I didn't deserve for that kind of treatment to happen. But one of the things I think about a few years after that, I was a member of the Nation of Islam. I don't subscribe to the Nation now, but it was important to my life as a young black man at that time. One of the things that I always appreciate about the Nation is that they said to us in our training, brothers, this is how you conduct yourself if you're stopped by the police. I always will remember that. Now, I agree with you, Brother Hayden. It's not about making people passive. It's about making people aware and giving them the survival tools that are necessary so they actually can stay alive, to actually do the kind of organizing work that we're talking about. I'm saying this because just 2 weeks ago, we did a session with 10 black and Latino boys in Brooklyn, ages 10 to 17, and practically all those boys said the same thing. They've been stopped by the police, or they're already feeling like they're suspicious, being looked at as suspicious or criminalistic by people. And so I want to stress this again, what I said earlier, is that sometimes we as progressives like to skip over a few steps, and we can't afford to do that. What I'm getting from a lot of people in my community, not just in Brooklyn, but all around the country, what do I tell my boy, my son? These are single mothers, these are fathers and mothers, if they are in these kind of situations. And I think we need to be very clear that we have a responsibility, as we call ourselves activists and organizers, regardless of our racial background, to say, here are some things you can do. It doesn't guarantee that you're not going to get beat down or shot by the police, but be aware that this may help your situation. If we skip that very simple step, I think we're doing our communities an injustice. And we're never going to get to the level of having kids understand that we can organize and videotape the police. We can do what the Malcolm X grassroots movement does, which is cop watch. All that stuff is necessary and important. But I need to be able to tell these parents, especially these single mothers raising boys by themselves, here's what you can do. I put out a book a couple years ago called the Black Male Handbook. In the back of the book is a section called for black males, what to do if you're stopped by the police. If y'all want a copy of it, email me at kevin@kevinpowell.net, that particular section. I'm sorry, as a grassroots organizer who's out there every single day, I'm not just talking theoretically. I'm not talking anything other than what I see on the streets every day. People want to know, what do we do? What do we do? Something you alluded to, Mr. Hayden, I think is important. The police in the community actually know you because you actually are involved in those whole police-community relations stuff. I go to a lot of those kind of meetings in Brooklyn, New York. Most of the community's not there. We don't show up this stuff. We don't show up the community, but we don't show up at anything. And so part of the response, part of being organized, it's got to be a multi-leveled approach. We can talk all this grand stuff about revolution, and believe me, I want it to happen. However, People in the community need basic solutions right now, practical things that they can do. If we don't meet those needs, we're never going to get to the stuff that we're talking about here. It's lofty, and we're being unrealistic about that stuff. I hate to say it. And the last thing around, I think that we should just tell the children the truth. It's real simple. Tell them the truth. You know, we need to tell, parents ask me all the time, Black Latino parents, you need to tell your children that you live in a society where you're looked at as a criminal at a certain point. You're not going to no longer be considered cute or attractive, you're going to be considered dangerous by somebody, particularly if you happen to be a male, an increasing number of females in our communities. Stop lying to our children. Stop lying to our children. And something that the educator talked about, I agree with, that whole issue, if someone raised the issue of morality, it's debatable whether this country has ever had any morality. I think the real question is, you know, not how do we inform people about, you know, I don't want to get into arguments about should marijuana be legalized. That's a personal opinion. You know, my issue is, you know, give people the facts, man. Just make it plain as Malcolm X said. Brother Hayden in his presentation laid it out very simply. 2.4 million people are incarcerated in this country. We have 25% of the world's prison population in America. Say that to people. Know the facts and put it out there to people. I do it all over the country. If people don't know what prison industrial complex means, explain it to them in very simple language. This is what's going on. Make them see a film called Angola, which shows how we literally went from slavery in this country to prisons in this country. It's all laid out there. But we have to have the information and stop talking in terms that are over people's heads. Keep it simple. That's all I'm saying.
We're going to take some more questions, then we're going to knock all these out. Let's do 3 more.
All right. I wanted to touch in a little bit of a different direction. A number of the panelists talked about human rights and coalition building and how that all interplays with other different causes and resistance movements. So I wanted to ask about a number of immigrant communities and a number of religious communities, like, for example, the Arab community or the Muslim community, have been looking for inspiration towards, you know, the African American resistance movement, whether it's within the civil rights movement or, you know, more recent movements. So, what are some of the pros and cons you see towards this approach? And you know, like, what were some of the lessons that are valuable to be learned, and where do you see like misappropriations happening in terms of people drawing from those experiences?
You want to start that off? You said what are the pros and cons of this approach? Could you just repeat what this approach is?
Other communities from outside of the African American community. I realize that there are, so like religious communities, immigrant communities that are looking towards African American movements for inspiration.
Gotcha. So what are the pros and cons? Oh, yeah. Yeah. I just want to make sure they heard that one. The panel said from here. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. 20 years ago today, I was a 15-year-old kid living in Crenshaw District in South Central Los Angeles. And I was curious to know if any of you would like to address the April 29th, 1992 uprising in Los Angeles. I think it touches on each of the issues that each one of you brought up today, and thank you for coming.
Hi. Since oppression and resistance are inextricably linked together, I have posed some things that I want to ask about. What do we do about this thing that's called resistance? And so how are we going to determine what we want to do and how we go about doing it? I think we need to ask a few questions. What is the message that we want to deliver about this thing called resistance, and how are we going to frame the issue? And why do we think that this message is important to the people that we're talking to? And who do we need to be talking to in order to advance this goal of resistance? And how do we get people motivated and stay true to the goal of resistance? And finally, how do we convey the message and the content of this thing called resistance to make others willing to engage in this thing called resistance? And two other things. Hayden talked about talking to the choir. Since all of this thing is about Malcolm X, there's this famous story about Malcolm when he first started for the nation. He went back to Elijah Muhammad and said, Apostle, I'm having a very difficult time trying to recruit people for the nation. And what Elijah Muhammad said to him, first go to the believers. So if these are the believers here, we're the ones who will carry the message on. And secondly, Tanis talked about embarrassing the United States. About 5 years ago, or maybe more years ago, we had Tiananmen Square problem in China. The United States had taken this egalitarian idea about oppression people in China as if oppression is not done here in the United States. And what the Chinese government told the United States, if you want to talk to us about what we do in our country, you have to stop oppressing the blacks, the Native Americans, all the folks here are locked up in jail. So the folks know that we have no moral standards here either.
Thank you. We're just going to have a few more than 3 just to keep everyone's voice into the conversation.
I just wanted to say, the same way we have to teach our children the truth and don't lie to them about you're not really liked in schools, on the street, anything you do can get you in trouble. I think we need to stop lying to ourselves. And if you would like to see a good form of resistance, you need to watch the Nation of Islam in action when Farah goes anywhere to speak. I don't care how many police they have out there. They are in control of that situation and what goes on with him. And they have the police so in check that even all the events that he has had that I've been to, I could be out there just showing my behind and the police won't say nothing to me because the nation is there and have them in check. Now I know I'm not a Muslim, but I think black people need to learn some of the Muslim ways of learning how to protect yourself, how to organize. That's a very good example. It's the only black semi-army that I can see that we have, that if there was any type of resistance coming against us other than the sneaky ways you're doing it with incarceration, we would be able to stand up against them. We're left at a point now where we're just wide open because people are scared. Our kids are walking around scared. The adults are walking around scared. It's shook. Scared to say anything, scared to look, scared to do anything. So if you want to learn how to resist, you look at the Nation of Islam and watch how when they go into public, they don't ask for no respect, they get it, they demand it. And that's what I think.
Thank you, panelists. Mr. Powell, I really appreciated your comments about how it's important work for white people to be organizing anti-racism trainings in their neighborhoods today. And I just wanted to ask if any of the other panelists had opinions on where the critical work for white people is who are participating in the resistance. Thanks.
The last 2 questions, I have wonderful news for everyone. The panelists here don't have to answer everything. Right after this, we have a wonderful panel called Occupied Prison, where we'll be looking at immigrant detention, incarceration. We'll be hearing from people who are on the front lines of the racial profiling and the detention of Muslims. So this is a wonderful start to that panel. And we want to hear the last few questions and then give you a chance to really add your insight.
Right. Well, what I'd like to do is after we do all the questions, particularly in light of the fact that there will be another panel covering some of these topics, I'd like each of the panelists to give maybe a final statement of each one being like 60 seconds, which is actually a lot of time. And let that statement be informed by the questions and comments that are being asked. Is that cool? Appreciate that. Go ahead, sister.
I'm totally happy to talk about this after the fact, so I'll ask you now. Farah, you might have talked about this earlier, but it resonates with me in part because I'm a woman, but particularly because of my own blind spots. I'd like to know more about the strategies and mechanisms that you are employing in your new film around organizing toward eradicating, actually, the police brutality against women. Secondly, though, I'd like the panelists to talk more about a comment that Kevin made, which sounded a bit like a footnote, but I think it's particularly important to the conversation, and that is, as progressives, many of us don't even get along with each other. So toward continued organizing and mission building, what are your thoughts about that, and what are your efforts to continue to work through that?
Farah, would you mind if we passed the hat on behalf of that film? Would you mind if we passed the hat in order to support your film? It's called Under Siege, right? It's called Under Siege. Okay, we're going to take up a little collection. Under Siege.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. As someone who works kind of on the ground with folks, at this point working with young men who are coming home from prison, I'm always stuck in a dilemma, both professionally and personally, with wanting to not only include their voices clearly, right, everywhere, whether it's at intellectual things like this or down at Occupy Wall Street, but I always fear, right, both as a professional and as a caring, sister and, God willing, one day mother of a Black child. I'm concerned about what do I do, or how do I ask them then to commit themselves and commit their bodies and possibly their freedom when they're already kind of in this space of having a criminal conviction. So I guess I'm asking about kind of strategies or something more than just the intellectual dilemma of working with folks who are incarcerated and including their voices in this struggle that's so important.
I spent a lot of time at Occupy Wall Street. The number one thing that came up for Black and Latino males was, I'm not going to get arrested. And I would say, you're a smart man for not wanting to get arrested. And I think that oftentimes a lot of folks who do not come from the same class background as many of us poor urban communities don't understand that. I said to the brothers, don't get arrested. We'd actually say when stuff started getting hot, and if any of y'all were out there, you know what I'm talking about. Like, brothers, y'all need to get away. You got a criminal record, because you are not going to just get out just the way some other folks may get out. And we need to be very clear about it. And again, tell them the truth about the situation, not be apologetic about it.
So what I wanted to say was I appreciate also Kelly raising the thing about white people's role. And around stop and frisk stuff, one thing that I've started doing, and my girlfriend and I have done, is we question the security guards at campuses, the cops who are stopping the Black kids and then saying to us, have a nice day, ma'am. And I'm encouraging my other white friends to do that too, and not to look away when they see cops stopping someone on the street. Number two, in line with that, I think that we have to stop allowing, as someone was raising the question of morality, we have to stop accepting those moral categories. We have to stop talking only about the innocent victims of the mass incarceration system and talk about everyone, talk about the permanent punishment system we have in this country is invading our entire lives. Angela talked last night about the schools, how the schools are turned into prisons. She's from California. I was saying, boy, when I speak in classes at CUNY, the workers' classes, what the mothers want to talk about is that the schools are prisons. That's number two. And number three, what was that last question? Oh, yes. I worked down at Wall Street, and we've had big struggles about when we do things. When we did the Day for Prisoners, we spent weeks struggling about allowing the terms to be set by the people who are vulnerable and respecting that, respecting for white people to respect that there are differences for us having a police record. Even me, I have this bad record. I blew up the Capitol, and I still have a job. So I was able to get a job. So we have to insist on those things and insist on solidarity, which is a form of love. I thought about that when you were saying that, about that the political form of love is often expressed as solidarity, and solidarity has to start with respecting the material conditions, the situation, and the voices of the people that you're supporting and who are leading you.
I'm going to be brief. The drug war question. If you listen to the commercials on TV by the pharmaceutical industry, they keep showing you drugs that have one beneficial effect and 15 side effects that will kill you. Right? And just recently, I think it was yesterday, I heard the statistic that over 25,500 people die each year from tobacco-related deaths. And anybody here that ever smoked a joint know it ain't gonna do nothing but make you laugh and give you an appetite. And it has no negative side effects. Yet it's illegal. And over 40% of the people that are locked up in this country, of that 2.4 million, are in there for drug crimes. Nobody, absolutely nobody, has the right to tell you what you can and you can't put in your body. This whole racist prohibition, this whole prohibition started out, it was racist. It started out with the Chinese, it went to the Mexicans, then it went to the blacks. And it's been, and you see that it's a known statistical fact that whites use drugs in proportion to their numbers in the population. We only 12.4% of the population, so we use 12.4% of the drugs. If they 70%, and they use 70% of the drugs, but none of them go to jail or anything. But I think that the solution to that is that nobody should tell us, man, this body is mine, 24/7, every day. I wash it, I take care of it, I feed it, you understand, I exercise it. This is my body. And I think the solution to that is that they should do just like they do with them drugs that have 15 side effects. Tell you all the information you need about that drug, and then leave it up to you whether you use it or not. And stop criminalizing us with that.
Thank you. Okay. But I'm sorry, we 15 minutes over to 15 minutes over.
Just let me hit one more.
Okay.
All right. White people.
Oh, bro, that's gonna go. All right. That's at least 20 off the top, bro. I gotta cut. All right. 30 seconds, bro, please. We cut it on other people trying to set up.
From Attica to my organization efforts on felon disenfranchisement, trying to return the right to vote to people, and the work that I'm doing with the campaign to end the new Jim Crow, nobody works harder than the young white people that are involved in this organizing, this struggling, and race be damned. Man, because black people, I'm finding this out from direct observation, direct experience. We sometimes get into gangbanging just like, but it's verbal gangbanging, just like the Crips and the Bloods, man. That's why it took for the last 40 years, this prison population has exploded, because we don't even talk to one another. If we got 5 drug programs in the community, we don't even connect horizontally. All we're concerned about is what's coming from the funders. We don't even talk to one another. You know, so when you talk about, I want people that's going to put in the work. That's the kind of people I want to work with. And I don't care what the color they skin is, what their nationality is, or where they come from.
Thank you.
Mike?
I agree with all the panelists that we do need to build solidarity across our, across our movements. We need to teach pride when we talk about our children. We need to teach them pride. We need to talk about what it means to be, what dignity means and what humanity means. And we need to talk about freedom. And we need to unite in the demands for all of these things. Now, in answer to the question about immigrants and the pros and cons of looking towards African-American communities, the pros are that African-American communities have been extremely successful, from Ida B. Wells with the anti-lynching movements to, again, the petitioning of the international community by Martin Luther King and the NAACP, which had a great influence on the passage of the 1965 Civil Rights Act, because the United States was embarrassed. Now, the other thing I want to say about that is, conversely, we also have a lot to learn from our immigrant brothers and sisters, because they understand. I was born in Haiti, so the concept of human rights, despite the fact that we're the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, the concept of human rights is something that we are taught and that we talk about, and that we know every little thing that happens, we're talking about human rights. We're talking about human rights. And so there's a lot to learn. It is not that complicated for us to learn a new language, to develop cultures where we understand what human rights are. Because really, basically, it is about foregrounding dignity for all and making it explicit that a violation against every single member of this panel means a violation against all of us. Lastly, in terms of just the organizing, there was a sister who asked about what we're doing in terms of organizing. We're building coalitions. We want a space at the table with these groups who have been doing We have a lot to learn. In terms of organizing, though, we really want to organize to support the elimination of state laws that prevent public access to civilian complaints and investigations against law enforcement officers. They need to break it down so that we know what exactly happens, how many cases get dropped, what are the cases about. So that's one of the things that we want to do, that we're doing, in addition to know your rights trainings.
Y'all can battle that out there. We have,
and telling our stories.
Yes, we have literally 90 seconds. There's an elder who has a question. I'm not going to let her not ask a question. So what I'd like to do, and Kevin actually never got a chance to give his answer. He answered a very specific thing. So I'd like, Mother, if you could ask your question. That's fine. You can do whatever you want. After which Kevin is going to give a 30-second response, and then we are all going to prepare for the next panel.
You may have heard, if you were in the room, that I'm from Sunflower County, Mississippi. And the lady who spoke, where is she? Talking about the Brothers of Islam and their...
Yep.
Bless you. I'd like to piggyback on you and tell of one of the proudest moments of my life. I've been at the United Nations for 62 plus years. The day that Obama, as President of the United States, was scheduled to speak, you've never seen tighter security, and I lost my pass. But I had enough familiarity to get a pass, and everything from Grand Central Station all the way over was detailed and critical. The police department of the city of New York was in charge. But let me tell you, honey, there were Muslim brothers, young, old, black, white, black and yellow, I don't know. Every one of them bowed so respectfully. And that was one of the proudest moments of my life. The same thing at Gil Noble's funeral last week. Were the ushers in charge? Muslim brothers were there. Brothers of Islam, Fruit of Islam. And by the way, sister, I've been at the YWCA 72 plus years. Our main purposes are the elimination of racism and the empowerment of women. I asked your executive if he heard of the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery Resistance and Abolition, and I'm giving you papers. Google it.
I just want to let everyone know that the exonerated defendants of the Central Park jogger case are here and will be speaking. And the next panel will address immigrant detention as the new phase of this crisis of mass incarceration. We're trying to talk about these two issues together, so please join us for the next session. Thank you.
Kevin Powell will give his
really quick. Someone brought up an important point. LA Rebellion. Is he still here? 20 years later. I was out there afterwards. Shortly spent a lot of time in LA doing a documentary about it. South Central, East LA, the whole Koreatown, the whole 9 yards. And I think. To me, the tragedy of any uprising that we have is that there's not real organizing happening afterwards. You know, there was some pockets of it that happened in LA. We've seen it in other places around the country over the years. I just think that we as organizers, again, have got to be there on the ground level. I'm going to bring it to hip-hop for a second because I'm a hip-hop head. Ice Cube and Ice-T said it back in the day. We were talking about this stuff for years. Y'all just weren't paying attention. And so I want to bring it back to us, of course, to intellectuals, scholars, activists, artists, whatever. If we're not listening to the people, this stuff will happen, and it will be like, why did this happen? And then it'll go away, and people will still be in the same conditions. When I drive through those communities, it's the exact same thing as it was 20 years ago. Nothing has really changed. You know, what probably has changed has been a growth in the Latino community out in LA, as you know, since you're from out there. There still is the divide between Latino, black, and brown people. People are not getting together, not working together. And the recipe for another kind of uprising is there, just like it is here in New York City and everywhere else in the country. In terms of activism, Franz Fanon, Repression Plenary, really quickly, he said, meet the people where they are. Folks, people are on Twitter and Facebook right now. I think if you call yourself an organizer in 2012, I don't care how progressive revolutionary you claim to be, if you're not on Twitter and Facebook and actively engaging the people on a regular basis where they are, there's something wrong with you calling yourself an activist or revolutionary. You know, I'm serious. I'm serious because a lot of the stuff that we do, for example, we've done work around Troy Davis, around Occupy Wall Street, around Trayvon Martin. We have not created a single flyer. All of it has been via text messaging, Twitter, and Facebook, and we've been able to reach thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Now, I'm clear that these things were created by the capitalistic system, but there's a way that we can use it to be subversive, just how our ancestors were subversive, to make some sort of changes in our communities and raise consciousness, and we'd be foolish not to engage with things. And Sister brought up about the progressive community. I'll just end it here. I just think that we have got to be about our holistic development, our holistic development, our holistic development. I cannot work with people who call themselves progressive who do not know how to demonstrate love to themselves, to each other. I'll leave with bell hooks is why I think we should study very closely. It is the reason why she wrote those books about love over and over again. People call her crazy, but she realized, wait a minute, I'm doing all this work with progressive people, but I'm not seeing any love in those progressive people. And so we got to be about personal transformation as well, which Gloria Steinem is talking about too. So thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Everybody, it's been a wonderful and enlightening panel, and I'm really grateful to all four of these panelists. Can you give them one more round of applause, please? Make sure that you stay around for the next panel. The next panel is going to cover so many powerful things and really extend and expand the conversation we have right now. Also, in the lobby, I have some copies of my new book with Mumia Abu-Jamal. He spoke last night. Our book is here. He wanted to make sure it was here. By the way, we're not making any money on this book. I ain't trying to sell y'all nothing. I just want y'all to support it. The book is for sale, though, and it does go to Mumia's defense and also goes to Third World Press. But there's a book of the classroom to sell out there. But thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. Thank you for making this such a wonderful conversation. Peace.
Okay, we're going to reconvene and start the next panel in about 15 minutes. 15 minutes.